Beat 'em ups, baby!
I think it's no surprise to anyone that this is my favorite genre. I can play and vibe with nearly anything from survival horror to JRPGs. There's nothing that really hits the spot like walking right, and sometimes left, and hammering the attack button. Yes, I am bad at almost everything else. Speaking of beat 'em ups, the Yakuza series has become so important to me in many ways, and has become the gold standard for what a solid beat 'em up should be in my opinion. I feel like they're a wild evolution of what the genre has started out as, and once I finished Lost Judgment, I learned two things. 1. Punk-ass bullies don't know the dangers of attacking a grown man in a parry stance, and 2. That my adoration of this genre stems all the way back to my early years with video games. It made me wonder, what games form the foundation of my tastes? Today we'll take a quick look at two games I played back when I was a lot younger, and trace where exactly my love of beat 'em ups came from. I'll also point out cool things I learned while sitting down to play them again. Without further ado, let's climb out of the sewer. This is it. This is the start of it all. When I was a kid, I religiously woke up to watch TMNT every single Saturday morning. Truthfully, I don't know what drew me so closely to it. I feel like it was so different from everything I saw at the time, having grown up on Scooby-Doo and Rugrats. I also didn't know it, but this would be my first exposure to anime, as you can definitely see it's very adjacent in its art style. Turtle Fever hit me hard, and my parents took notice of my growing love for the series. So once I got my first console, naturally my dad would get me the first TMNT game he could find, and I gotta say, he had some good taste. Turtles 03 would be my first beat 'em up, and the second game that I ever played. Oddly enough, TMNT 03 would only feature 2-player co-op despite there being 4 turtles. Anyway, this game lets you pick a turtle and go through sections and story beats based off the TV show of the same name, with some game-exclusive levels and sections. I wouldn't say each level is absolutely unforgettable, because some are the opposite. Some sections kind of blend together, but some of them are at least visually distinct from each other. The really memorable parts have their own unique gimmicks, like the construction site's environmental hazards. The enemy designs aren't too much to write home about either, because they do recycle them a lot, but I do appreciate the variety in some of them. You get your purple dragons, your foot soldiers, your mousers, and so on. I went through a couple of levels with each turtle, but I ultimately settled on Mikey because he's the best boy. The turtle you pick has no real bearing on the story because it's all the same, but Raphael's route did have some extra dialogue early on. However, the turtle you pick does affect the way you fight. Each turtle has the same basic buttons, but because they all wield different weapons, they have different properties. For example, Donnie uses his bow staff, which has the most range, but the slowest startup, and he's really good at dealing with crowds, so I'd say he's the best character to use in co-op. Mikey, however, was my favorite to play, because what he lacks in range and power, he makes up for crazy damage output. That's because his attacks are quick and hit multiple times. One new thing I learned while playing is that you can not only use the dash button to reposition yourself defensively, but you can also use it offensively. What I mean by this is that you can use it to get up close and personal once you finish off another foe. And most importantly, you can use this dash to cancel out of almost any attack, meaning that once your attack connects, you can input your dash to cancel out of the ending animation to continue your combo. So you couple this with Mikey's insane agility and DPS, and you become a one-turtle army. I have been praising the gameplay a lot, but I wanted to take some time to acknowledge this game's soundtrack. To me, it's really important for any game to have a really strong soundtrack, as I think it's what you remember the easiest when looking back on your time with it. The soundtrack for TMNT 03 goes so hard, and it's part of why my memories of this game are so fond. Memories of taking out waves of enemies in my Mikey pajamas come flooding back. Those were truly simple times, and I'd give anything to be back drinking chalky milk and watching TMNT again. I think this is the start of my love and adoration for the beat-em-up genre. TMNT 03 gave me an idea of what to expect when jumping into a game like this, and I still come back to it from time to time when I'm feeling nostalgic. The next game we'll cover is drastically different in tone, but I think will be pretty interesting to cover regardless. There is not a soul on God's green earth who remembers Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the original Xbox. To this day, I've not met a single person who's played it. You can't convince me that they're real. But who can blame them, really? It was only released on the original Xbox and never saw any ports or re-releases. The Xbox also doesn't have a proper emulator either, so as a result, Buffy's just kind of faded into obscurity over the years. Which is a shame because what's here is really fun and unique. I'm going to preface all my thoughts on the game by saying I haven't seen much of the show, so all my knowledge of the world and its setting comes from here. Buffy sees you playing as, well, Buffy Summers, a high schooler who moonlights as the Slayer, and the Slayer's task is to protect her hometown Sunnyvale from vampires or other supernatural occurrences, especially against the sinister Lord of Vampires, Master. I enjoyed the writing a lot in this game, and I think it's really enhanced by its voice cast. Speaking of which, the actors' likenesses and voices from the show were all used for their respective characters in the game, with the exception of Sarah Michelle Gellar, oddly enough. I think this is really weird because she is Buffy. She's even front and center on the box too. Anyway, the game itself has a lot of interesting things going for it. I would classify this game as a beat 'em up with horror elements. Buffy is skilled in hand-to-hand combat, and you'll be shaving down health bars with her fists and legs before driving stakes through hearts. These aren't the only tools you have at your disposal, because you can use weapons like bats, rakes, and holy water. One thing I really wish this game had is a dedicated block or dodge button. There is a strafe you can use to close in on opponents, but that's about it. The lack of defensive options means that enemies and bosses can kind of just hit you for free in most instances, and I think the fact that you can't really mitigate damage is kind of hurtful to its combat. Despite this, Buffy does make you feel as empowered as possible, so I wouldn't classify it as a survival horror type beat. Those games are all about calculating risk versus reward, and managing limited supplies against overwhelming odds. Survival horror games give you the tools to fight back if you're smart with your resources, but Buffy's a little different. She may as well be chugging stamina and X's and using heat moves on these idiots. However, this is not to say that the game doesn't share characteristics with survival horror games. As you navigate the environments, you solve puzzles, round up stragglers, and pick up tools to give yourself an edge over your enemies. Most levels also suffer from chronic shitslockitis as well. A lot of the levels and set pieces have their own dark vibes I enjoy, which are greatly enhanced by this game's sound design. For example, the high school level has an eerie track playing over it. We got some spooky chants going on. In the quieter moments, you can hear the sounds of crickets and the sounds of cars driving by the high school. In some rooms, you can hear the dull humming of an air conditioner or dripping water from the locker room showers. It's these little details that go a long way in creating an environment with a tangibly spooky atmosphere. Special shoutouts to the Catacombs level for not only being dark as fuck, but having some unsettling whispering, groaning, and laughter baked into its BGM. So how did I actually hear about this game despite never having seen the critically acclaimed anime of the same name? One night, my family was at a Blockbuster. Yeah, I know. We were deciding on what game to rent for the weekend, and my sisters decided on Buffy, having been fans of the show. Being young at the time, I was violently against it. This is because I was, and still am, a huge coward. Anything related to horror scared the shit out of me, and I wanted nothing to do with it. In fact, after watching The Ring for the first time, I unplugged my TV every single night out of fear of Sadako coming out and just bonking me on the face. Needless to say, I lost the majority vote that night, and my sisters borrowed my Xbox to play Buffy. I took scared little glances from the kitchen like the little poo babby I was. I remember specifically being afraid of the zombies in this game and also the spiders in the catacomb level, but the thing that freaked me out the most was the game over screen and sound effects, because Buffy makes this really weird sounding death yell and Master laughs over that and it freaks me out. Like, even during my replay for the footage, I was still a little unsettled by it. But it wasn't until my sisters hit a roadblock much later on that I reluctantly agreed to help them, but little did I know I would enjoy it so much that I'd actually help them finish. I would attribute this game specifically to helping me appreciate all horror, as it was something I struggled with when I was a kid. It was to the point where I couldn't step into a party city without panicking and breaking into a cold sweat during the Halloween season. Now it's my preferred genre of movies, and I have no problem dipping my toes into a horror game. It's a sincere shame that Buffy is marooned on the Xbox. It's a console exclusive that I wish had more recognition, and it's a hard recommend because it's still only on the Xbox. I'm still holding on to my copy because I don't think it'll see a facelift or a port anytime soon, but I hope I'm really wrong about that. Hey, if you've made it to the end of this video, I'd like to thank you for your patience and your time today. If you're a continued supporter of the channel, thank you as always. Feel free to doot the sub button and dingle that like button if you enjoyed what you saw today. I'd like to thank Polis again, as always, for her amazing artwork, which is always a treat to commission. Her socials are on screen and in the description. For today's video, I wanted to try a little something different from what I usually do, and I hope you guys ended up enjoying that. If you did, I'd be more than happy to cover both games in full someday, maybe alongside something else. I'd even like to do more quick looks like this in the future. So before I leave you all today, what were some games that you felt formed your taste in games today, and why? I'd love to hear from you, dear viewer. But as always, thank you as always for watching, take care of yourselves, and remember to stay gold.